The morning everything unraveled began with words that pierced deeper than I thought possible. Claire stood in the doorway, her eyes cold and unrecognizable, and said, "You're worthless. I'm taking the kids." Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed, but the blow landed harder than losing my job earlier that same day. That morning, I had walked into the factory where I had given nearly a decade of my life. There was no warning, no chance to fight for my place, just a box with my belongings and a handshake that felt more like a dismissal of who I was. By the time Claire delivered her words, I was already hollowed out. When she said she was taking Matthew and Lily, it was as if she tore away the last thread holding me together. I stood frozen, clutching the faded lunch bag my mother Eleanor had stitched years ago. Memories of my children's laughter, the scribbled drawings stuck to the fridge, and the bedtime stories we shared flashed before me. In that moment I could feel it all slipping away. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. I stepped outside, the September air biting at my skin as though the world itself was reminding me I had nothing left. My thoughts spiraled, whispering that she was right, that I had failed not only Claire but also Matthew and Lily. I walked aimlessly, the streets blurring beneath my feet, until I stopped in front of a small diner I had never noticed before. Its warm yellow glow pushed against the night, offering something I couldn't name. Inside, I slid into a booth tucked in the corner. A waitress placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me, and I stared into its dark surface, seeing a reflection of someone I barely recognized. A man beaten down, adrift, lost. I was so wrapped in my own despair that I didn't notice when an older man slid into the seat beside me. "You look just like my son," he said, his voice steady but tinged with something heavier. I turned startled. His weathered face carried decades of stories, but his eyes held a sorrow that rooted me to the spot. He hesitated, then added, "But he's been missing for 35 years. My chest tightened as his words sank in. Before I could respond, he leaned closer, studying me with an intensity that made the air between us feel charged. Then he spoke again. 5 simple words that would alter the course of my life in ways I could never have foreseen. I grew up in a home built on work and quiet pride. My father, Richard, was a mechanic who could coax life out of any engine. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, his lessons stayed with me. A man is measured by how he stands when everything else falls apart, he once told me, while I sulked over a broken-down truck as a teenager. I dismissed it then, but his voice would echo back to me years later, sharper than ever. My mother, Eleanor, was his balance. Gentle but steady, she believed in patience, in kindness, and in giving people second chances. She sat with me through long nights of failed assignments, reminding me that persistence mattered more than talent. I carried her lessons into adulthood, though somewhere along the way I let myself believe they no longer applied. I was never the athlete, never the one people pointed to with admiration, but I was reliable. I took pride in showing up early to the factory, even when my back ached or my hands were raw. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me purpose. It made me believe I was enough. And then came Claire. Sharp, magnetic, full of fire. She was everything I thought I needed. Where I stalled, Claire always surged ahead. Early in our marriage, she told me once, "You make me feel steady, Ethan, like the ground won't disappear beneath me." I carried that sentence for years as proof that I was doing something right. We built a family on that foundation, and when Matthew was born, followed 3 years later by Lily, I thought we had found our rhythm. But over time, Claire's words shifted. What she once called steady, she began to call stagnant. What she once called safe, she began to call suffocating. "You never want more," she would say after another tense conversation about bills or my reluctance to take risks. "You're fine staying at the bottom while everyone else climbs." She wasn't wrong. I had once dreamed of starting my own repair shop, maybe even teaching Matthew how to fix things when he got older. But those dreams were buried under the weight of responsibility and routine. Every morning I clocked in. Every evening I tried to be the husband and father I thought I was supposed to be. I believed it was enough. Enough for me, but not enough for her. The kids, though, never looked at me with disappointment. At 10, Matthew had Claire's sharp wit but carried my quiet curiosity. He asked questions about everything, from how engines worked to why people who loved each other could still argue. Lily, 7, carried a joy that lit up our home. She loved drawing animals and taping them proudly on the fridge so I would see them when I got home. They were the reason I kept pushing forward, even as the ground beneath me began to fracture. My younger brother, Daniel, was another voice I couldn't ignore. More ambitious, always reaching for something bigger. He once told me over a beer, "You've got to fight for yourself, Ethan. You keep letting life bowl you over." I had laughed at the time, but his words lingered in the corners of my mind. When the factory let me go, it was like someone had torn away a piece of who I was. I had walked through those steel doors nearly every day for 10 years. I knew the rhythm of the machines, the smell of oil and dust, the way the light slanted through the grimy windows. Losing that job wasn't just about a paycheck. It was about losing proof that I mattered, that my effort had weight. I drove home that afternoon with a box of my belongings on the seat beside me, watching my reflection blur against the passing world. My chest was tight, my thoughts louder than the hum of the engine. How would I tell Claire? What would she say? When I stepped into the house, she was already waiting. Her eyes flicked from my face to the box in my arms. "They let you go, didn't they?" she asked. Her tone wasn't worried, just cold, as if she had already known the answer. I nodded. "Cutbacks. Nothing I could do," she folded her arms. "Nothing you could do. That's always your answer." I tried to tell her it wasn't the end, that I would find another job, that we would be okay. But before I could finish, she said the words that still echo in my mind. "You're worthless." "I'm taking Matthew and Lily." The walls seemed to close in. I wanted to shout, to fight, to prove her wrong. I looked at the family photos on the wall, at the crayon sketches taped proudly to the fridge, and felt a hollow ache spreading through me. Claire turned, grabbed a bag, and told the kids they would be staying at her sister's for the night. Matthew's eyes were wide and uncertain. "Dad, are you coming?" he asked. My throat burned as I forced a smile and shook my head. "Not tonight, buddy. I'll see you soon." I stood in the doorway as they pulled out of the driveway, the sound of the car fading into the night, leaving only silence behind. Alone, I walked back into the kitchen and set the factory box down on the table. Inside the box were the fragments of a decade I could never get back. A dented thermos, the gloves I'd worn until the leather thinned, and a drawing Matthew had made of us holding hands, his stick figure grinning up at mine. My chest tightened as if the air itself was collapsing around me. I couldn't bear to stay in that house another minute. I walked out into the night, my steps heavy, my mind empty. I didn't know where I was going until the faint glow of a diner sign cut through the dark. The building was small, wedged between a pawn shop and a gas station. Its flickering neon looked tired, but the windows glowed with a yellow warmth that pulled me in. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. Heat wrapped around me, carrying the scent of bacon grease and burnt coffee. The same smell that had lingered in countless early mornings before the factory. I slid into a booth near the back. A waitress with weary eyes filled a cup and set it down in front of me without asking. I muttered a thank you and stared into the coffee, watching a reflection that looked far older than 35. My face carried the weight of failure, my hands trembling slightly as I lifted the cup but never drank. Claire's words played on repeat. "You're worthless." "I'm taking the kids." I told myself she didn't mean it, that anger had driven her to say it. But deep down I knew the truth. The arguments about money, the sighs when I came home late, the silences where comfort should have been. All of it had been building toward this moment. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to push the noise out of my head, when I heard the scrape of a chair against the floor. Someone had taken the seat across from me. I lowered my hands and found an old man watching me. His skin was weathered, his gray hair combed neatly, his shirt faded but clean. His eyes, sharp and unflinching, pinned me where I sat. "You look just like my boy," he said, his voice steady, deliberate. I blinked, unsure what to say. "You must be mistaken." He studied me, his gaze searching. "No, you have his eyes. The way your jaw tightens when you're holding something in. My son vanished 35 years ago. I've been looking ever since. Then I walk in here and see you." His voice trailed off, his lips pressed tight. I leaned back, uneasy. "I'm sorry about your son, but I'm not him." The man nodded slowly but didn't leave. "Maybe not, but you carry the same weight he did before he left. A man shouldering more than he knows how to bear." His words struck harder than I wanted to admit. I should have told him to leave me alone, but I couldn't. There was something in his eyes, something I recognized, the kind of grief that becomes part of you. "My name's Walter," he said finally. Extending a hand, I hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, steady, grounding. "Ethan," I said quietly. Walter nodded as if the name meant something to him. He leaned back, folding his hands on the table. "You've lost something," he said. A hollow laugh escaped me. "Lost everything, actually. My job in the morning, Claire leaving that night with Matthew and Lily. Everything felt like it had been stripped away in a single day." My throat tightened as I said it aloud, though Harlan didn't flinch. He watched me with the kind of patience that belonged to a man who'd weathered worse storms. "I know that hollow," he said quietly. "Different details, same emptiness." His words landed where I'd been too raw to touch. "You start to believe you're invisible," he added, "that nobody would notice if you vanished." The thought had been a whisper in my own head for hours, and hearing it spoken back made it louder. I pressed my knuckles into the table until my skin burned. I'd worked 10 years at that factory, 10 years of early mornings and aching hands, and they'd closed the door as if none of it mattered. I'd built a house, tried to build a life, and Claire had told me I'd ruined it. My voice broke when I spoke of the kids. They'd looked at me tonight with confusion, with the frightened questions only children can ask. I had no answers for them. Harlan leaned forward, his gaze steady and intent. "You don't have to let this be how your story ends," he said. I stared back, uncertain. "What choice do I have?" I asked. He exhaled slowly, as if choosing the right words took more strength than I could imagine. "You can stand up. You can fight. You can refuse to let their words become your final chapter." He spoke as if rehearsing to himself. "Do you think I stopped hoping because 35 years passed? Do you think I let silence be the judge?" His voice hardened a fraction. "If I had, my life would be full of nothing but what-ifs." The diner around us dimmed in my mind. The clatter of cutlery and low conversations became a distant hum under the weight of what he was saying. For the first time since Claire's sentence split my life, something small and stubborn sparked inside me. A tiny, urgent ember of refusal. I studied Harlan and felt a strange, involuntary connection. He saw in me the same emptiness he'd carried for decades, and he wasn't willing to let it go unchallenged. He rested his hands on the table and looked at me as if I were the only person in the room. "Listen," he said, his voice low but fierce. And then he said the 5 words that would tilt everything. "Don't let history repeat itself." Those words hit harder than Claire's cruelty, and harder than the factory's silence. For a moment I couldn't breathe. It was like he'd reached inside me and pulled into the light every self-doubt I'd been burying. "What do you mean?" I whispered, afraid of the answer. Harlan didn't flinch. When my boy disappeared, I looked back and saw all the ways I'd been absent. Long hours, impatience, a coldness I thought was discipline. I told myself I was providing, but really I was avoiding what mattered. I convinced myself everything else was enough, and then he was gone. His confession was quiet but steady. 35 years later, I ask myself if he left, because I'd already left him in the small ways that count. If I had the chance again, I wouldn't waste it. I pictured Matthew's wide, uncertain face asking if I was coming with them, Lily's tiny hand in Claire's as they walked out. The images arrived sharp and terrible. I'd been ready to let myself be defeated because fighting felt too exhausting, too uncertain. But hearing Harlan's regret, feeling the ache behind his words, made the choice clear. If I gave in now, I'd be stepping into the same future he regretted every day. The booth felt smaller, the coffee colder, but inside me something rearranged. It wasn't a magic fix. Nothing erased the loss or the fear. But Harlan's story became a warning I could not ignore, and a promise I could make. I would not let silence and absence define how my story ended. I pushed back from the table, palms flat against the worn vinyl, and for the first time since the day had begun to fall apart, I felt the weight shift, not gone, but different, carrying with it a direction. I pressed my palms flat against the table. I don't want to be that kind of father. I don't want Matthew and Lily growing up believing I walked away from them. Harlan's head dipped in a slow nod, a flicker of relief in his eyes. Then don't. You still have a chance. A man can lose a job. A marriage can fall apart. But you can't lose yourself. Unless you hand yourself over. My throat was dry as I forced the words out. What if Claire keeps me from them? What if she shuts me out completely? His jaw tightened, and for the first time his voice carried steel. Then you fight. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with everything inside you that loves those children. You show up. You let them see you're there no matter what. You make sure they never doubt that they matter more than your pride, more than your pain. Don't disappear, and don't let them wonder if you cared. Because if you walk away now, Ethan, that question will haunt them for the rest of their lives. The conviction in his tone set something burning in my chest. I stared at this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, speaking as if he had been waiting decades to pass this burden along. For the first time all day, something stirred inside me. Small, fragile, but stronger than the shame that had been dragging me down. I leaned back, fists clenched, my breathing steadier than it had been in hours. I'm not going to walk away. I'll see my kids. I'll tell them the truth. Their last memory of me won't be silence. Harlan's gaze softened and pride flickered across his face. That's it. That's the father they need. Not perfect, not unbroken, but present and still standing. My throat tightened. Thank you, I whispered, my voice rough. I don't know why you chose to sit here tonight, but I needed this more than I can explain. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Maybe I didn't choose. Maybe it was meant to happen. The waitress came by, topping off our coffee. I realized mine hadn't been touched. Harlan lifted his cup, sipped, and set it down with a quiet clink. You know what you need to do. Don't waste time. Don't let fear decide for you. Go. I stared at the steam curling from the mug, then at my scarred hands. They weren't the hands of a man Claire admired anymore, but maybe they could still belong to a father who refused to let go. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the tile. I'm going, I said, half to him and half to myself. Harlan reached across the table and set his hand firmly on my arm. His grip was stronger than I expected. Remember what I told you? Don't abandon them like I did. I nodded, his words branding themselves into me. Rising from the booth, I walked toward the door. The night air met me, cool against my skin, carrying away the heavy scent of grease and coffee. My steps had a weight, but also a purpose. In the parking lot, I glanced back at the diner. Through the window, Harlan was still there, cup in hand, watching me. He raised it in a small gesture, a silent send-off. I lifted my hand in return, then slid into the car. I knew where Claire would be. Whenever she needed a wall behind her, she went to her sister's house. That was where she had taken Matthew and Lily. My hands tightened around the wheel as the engine rumbled to life. For the first time in years, I wasn't drowning in what I'd lost. I was focused on what I still had to fight for. As the road stretched into the night, Harlan's words followed me, steady and unshakable. I didn't know what waited at the other end. I didn't know if Claire would slam the door in my face or if Matthew and Lily would even recognize me. But one thing burned clear. I wasn't walking away. The drive to Claire's sister's house felt endless. Every familiar turn, a small drumbeat of dread. My hands tightened on the wheel, Harlan's warning looping through my head like a mantra. Don't abandon them. I whispered it until the words steadied me. When I pulled into the driveway, light spilled from the windows and curtains shifted with movement inside. My heart thudded so loud I thought they might hear it from the street. I climbed out of the car and walked up to the door, breath visible in the night, fingers trembling as I knocked. The door opened and Claire stood there, hair tied back, arms folded, irritation written across her face. "What are you doing here?" she asked, sharp and chilly. I kept my voice level. "I came for Matthew and Lily. I need to see them." She shook her head, already dismissing me. "This isn't the time, Ethan. They're upset. You should go." Something in me that had been numb for months flared up. For too long I'd retreated when fights came, worn down by shame or defeat. "Not tonight." "No," I said, firmer than I felt. "I'm not walking away. You can leave me if that's what you want, but you are not taking them from me." They deserve to know I tried. Claire's jaw tightened. For a beat she said nothing, and that hush gave me courage. I forced the memory forward. The hospital room when Matthew was born, Claire's hand in mine. The way she'd once told me I made her feel safe, and I let it anchor me. "Do you remember when Matthew came home from kindergarten and said he wanted to learn how to fix things with me?" I asked, voice rough. "I may not have everything, but I've always loved them. I will not let them think I chose to disappear." A small voice cut through the tension. "Dad?" Matthew peered from around the hallway, eyes wide and searching. He stepped forward before Claire could stop him and threw his arms around my waist. He squeezed like he'd been holding fear inside all evening and suddenly let it go. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. Lily toddled after him, pressing into my leg and looking up with hopeful trust. "Are you staying, Daddy?" she asked, voice barely more than a breath. I knelt, wrapping my arms around them both, the world narrowing to the steady thrum of their hearts against my chest. "I'm here," I told them, cheek against Lily's hair. "I'm not going anywhere." Claire watched us, arms still crossed, but the hardness in her face softening into uncertainty. She had expected me to cower, to slip back into the shadows she'd come to count on. Instead, she found me standing taller than I had in years. "You think this changes everything?" she asked, quieter now. "It changes everything," I said, "because I finally know who I am. I might not have the job you wanted for me. I might have been a poor husband at times, but I'm their father, and I will fight to be with them. You can't take that from me." Matthew pulled back and looked at me with fierce earnestness. "We need you, Dad," he said. The simplicity of it broke something inside me open in a cleaner way than shame ever had. The doubt loosened. The shame lost its power under the steady light of my son's words. Claire's sister appeared behind her in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. She frowned, then spoke softly. "Maybe let him talk to the kids." I exhaled and nodded, feeling a cautious, stubborn hope begin to grow where the night had tried to hollow me out. "They deserve that much." Claire's voice was flat, her arms crossed, eyes sharp. For a long stretch, silence filled the room until she finally exhaled and stepped aside. "Fine, you can see them. But don't mistake this for forgiveness." I rose, steadying my hands on Matthew's shoulders while Lily clung to my side. "I'm not asking for forgiveness tonight," I told her softly. "But I will not stop being their father. And not again." We moved into the living room, the children pressed tight against me, Matthew leaning hard into my arm, Lily perched on my lap as if afraid I'd vanish if she let go. In the simplest words I could, I told them the truth. That sometimes parents argue, sometimes mistakes feel bigger than they are, and sometimes life breaks in places you don't expect. But none of that would ever change how much I loved them. Claire lingered near the wall, her expression guarded. I knew she wasn't ready to reconcile, maybe never would be. But I caught a flicker in her eyes. Something like respect. Something that hadn't been there in years. The evening stretched with quiet conversation. Matthew's questions tumbling out. Lily's laughter breaking the heaviness like sunlight through clouds. When it came time to leave, Matthew clutched my sleeve.
"You'll come back tomorrow, right?"
I bent to meet his eyes. Tomorrow. And the day after. And every day I can. Lily wrapped her arms around my neck. Promise? I kissed her hair. Promise. Stepping out into the cool night, I felt lighter than I had in years. My marriage was still broken. My job was still gone. My future uncertain. But the love of my children gave me something stronger than despair. Something worth fighting for. Walking to my car, Matthew's words echoed in my head. "We need you, Dad." 4 small words heavier than every insult Claire had thrown. Heavier than the factory's pink slip. And behind them was my father Richard's steady voice echoing from my memory. "Don't make the same mistakes I did." I gripped the wheel tighter as I started the engine. For the first time in a long time, I knew who I was and where I was going. The next morning, when I opened my eyes, the weight in my chest was different. Not the crushing despair of yesterday, but the steady burden of a promise I had made. A promise I would not break. The days that followed were hard. Claire stayed distant, her words sharp, reminding me often that she was done carrying a man who aimed for the bare minimum. But even in her coldness, she noticed something different. I didn't lash out. I didn't retreat. I stood my ground with quiet resolve, every glance at Matthew and Lily reminding me why. I picked up whatever work I could find, stacking boxes, hauling supplies, fixing broken things for neighbors. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me moving, proving to myself that I could still build, still provide. Slowly, new doors began to open. Richard gave me his old tools, his voice gruff but eyes softened. "Time to make something that's yours." My mother Eleanor brought meals over, telling me she hadn't seen me this steady in years. Even my brother stopped by, shaking his head. "I don't know what changed in you, but it looks good." Most importantly, Matthew and Lily never doubted me again. Matthew began asking for my help on school projects, pulling me in with a joy I hadn't seen in months. Lily filled the fridge with crayon drawings of us holding hands, taping them proudly in Claire's kitchen for all to see. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was becoming the father my children deserved. And that was enough. They were watching me every moment, not listening to my words as much as studying my choices. Each day I showed up, I reminded them that their father was still standing. A few weeks later, I found myself back at Daryl's diner. I wanted to thank the old man, to tell him how his 5 words had shifted the direction of my life. When I walked in, I scanned the booths, expecting to see him in his usual spot. But he wasn't there. The same waitress approached with a smile, and I asked if she'd seen him. "Do you mean Harold Vayner?" she said, tilting her head. I nodded quickly. Yes, gray hair, still strong for his age, serious but with a sharp presence. He sat with me right here. Her expression softened with confusion. I knew Harold. He used to come in years ago, but he's been gone a long time. Passed away more than a decade back. The coffee in my hand quivered slightly. I glanced around the diner, half expecting him to step out from behind a booth, but there was nothing. Just the familiar clatter of dishes, the murmur of voices, and the scent of frying bacon. Life moving on as if he had never been there at all. I walked over to the corner booth where he had sat with me that night. I slid into the seat and ran my hand across the polished surface of the table. Whether Harold had been flesh and blood or something far less explainable, I knew his presence had been real. His words had been real. His warning had pulled me back from the edge of becoming a man who disappeared from his children's lives. I sat there quietly for a long time, whispering a soft thank you into the empty air, hoping somehow it reached him. Then I stood and left, carrying his message with me like a compass I could no longer ignore. Looking back now, I understand the lesson he gave me. Life can strip everything from you. Jobs disappear. Marriages fracture. People you trust can cut deeper than strangers ever could. But none of that erases the responsibility to fight for the ones who truly matter. Father's worth isn't measured by a paycheck or by whether a marriage survives. It's measured by his presence, by his refusal to give up, by the steady love that anchors his children, even when the ground shakes beneath him. I am still rebuilding. I am still learning how to stand tall when everything feels unsteady. But I know now that I am not worthless. I am Matthew and Lily's father, and that alone is reason enough to keep moving forward. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: never abandon the people who need you. Do not let despair trick you into believing that leaving is easier than staying. Show up, especially when it feels impossible, because sometimes the simple act of being there can change a life forever. Thank you for hearing my story. If it spoke to you, if it made you think of your own family or the people you hold close, share it with someone who might need the reminder. Leave a comment and tell me what you carried away from this. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, subscribe to the channel. Together, we can keep reminding each other that no matter how broken life feels, there's always a reason to keep standing.